Hey everyone, James from the Flying Guillotine over here, bringing you a review of School on Fire. This is going to be a spoiler-filled review, but if you are still tuned in, I would just say, if you haven't seen the film, please watch this film, especially if you are a fan of Hong Kong cinema or Ringo Lam and have seen something like City on Fire. This is a great film. In my view, this may be the very best, or at least my favorite, of the Ringo Lam films. Definitely in the golden era of his career, very early on. This film feels like, sometimes there's a filmmaker and it just feels like they have been saving material, especially when they're a newer filmmaker. And sometimes, all the good material is in that first or second film, and that's what they're able to put out there. And that's pretty much their contribution to sort of the canon. I feel like this film, I think Ringo Lam had a lot more to give, but I think this film it feels just so personal, so angry, taking aim at just so many institutions that I think it just feels like one of those films that, he has been saving material for basically the first 35 years of his life in order to make something like this. Okay, so yeah, let's get into it. So School on Fire, the quick synopsis, just taken from Wikipedia, I think. A young schoolgirl becomes caught in triad activity after she testifies in court over a beating that results in a student's death. When news reaches the triad leader, he begins to extort protection money as events begin to escalate. In this case, escalate is a significant understatement. This film, that basically describes the whole plot. But this film is basically a series of escalations as this, fairly significant conflict happens like in the first 10 minutes of the film, and it just sort of builds and builds and builds, and even one of the characters who is not even necessarily a participant is kind of like who we are following, Funny Ewan's character in here. So this is very much a Ringo Lam film. This is the third in the On Fire trilogy. City on Fire, Prison on Fire, and then School on Fire came out last. Those two were very, very well received. They were nominated for a number of awards from the Hong Kong Film Awards. Talked a little bit about that on the Prison on Fire episode. This film, on contrast, was only nominated for one, which it won. Sarah Lee for the best friend character in here. Who does give a very good performance, but this film was not even nominated the year after. So despite that stuff happening, it's very controversial. It did make money, not as much as the other two, but it was controversial at the time with some of the main authorities in Hong Kong accusing it of glamorizing the triads, which is just, if you have seen this film, is just totally crap, totally bullshit, easy thing to call out, because I feel like this film, if anything, is just so hard-hitting on institutions and stuff like that, and which includes the triads. It does not portray the triad life as being particularly glamorous. You can find dozens of other Hong Kong films that have much more kind looks and more glamorized looks at it. If anything, triad life here is shown in a very fashion that kind of exposes it for being pretty shitty, especially at the lower levels, and those critiques remind me a little bit about critiques towards something like Wolf of Wall Street or something like that, which I thought was totally crazy at the time too. This film, I think of those three On Fire films, it is probably the angriest and the most going for it of them. Those films all have like this chaotic energy to it that Ringo Lam brings to a lot of his films, especially these three. But I think this one may have hit maybe a little bit closer, getting at a major artery or something like that, just taking aim at sort of the school system, and just showing it sort of being, poisoned from the root, and sort of like the integration of triads into it. One interesting thing about this film is I saw this film a little over a decade ago, and so this is a second watch for me, and I initially didn't like it at all. For me, it was definitely my least favorite of those, and so it's kind of gone from the least to my favorite. I think part of the reason is, at the time I was watching a lot of The Wire, and that my favorite season of The Wire is season 4, which really shows the schools and focuses on the kids and sort of the impacts of that. The Wire deconstructs these things in a very different way than this film does. Hong Kong cinema and Ringo Lam's strengths are not subtlety. And I think there are multiple ways you can sort of convey critical message towards institutions and stuff like that. And in the case of Ringo Lam, he's taking it in a very specific, very angry, very pointed, and occasionally, well, actually often, very over-the-top tone. Now, in my view, at least in this viewing, it doesn't diminish it, the fact that this is not like a subtle art house film. This film is just firing on all cylinders. You could think from the title that School on Fire is a little bit more of a sedate, like family drama sort of situation. And no, this film is absolutely grounded in genre. It's totally a thriller. The setting of it is just very, very different. It's a triad film. It's a gangster film. It has all of those elements in it. So I think maybe the fact that he's taking aim at something like this, which is very different from, a prison drama like Prison on Fire, or a cop drama like City on Fire, where you already have sort of like people that are more participants in the game of prisoners or criminals or cops and stuff like that. This is taking aim at institutions that might hit closer to home for ordinary, normal people. So yeah, I think those might be part of the reasons why it hit in such a way. About 1,200 people have logged this film on Letterboxd, which is about the same as Prison on Fire, significantly less than City on Fire. I love all three films. Personally, I would probably rank this film first, followed by Prison, and then City. I think they're all great, but I think for me, this film is the hardest hitting Ringo Lam film, taking aim at all kinds of social issues and stuff like that, and attacking them in a way that I think is very interesting. Like a lot of Ringo Lam's early films, it was written by Nam Yin, his brother. So again, someone that's very, very close to Ringo and to the process. Ringo in the past has said that Nam Yin basically is he often is like the more fiery and angry of the two. So that's kind of interesting too. I guess in looking at it in that sense, it's no coincidence that he has been behind and basically written the screenplays for a lot of those films early in Ringo's career before the handover that are definitely amongst his most effective, hard-hitting work. So a couple things I wanted to point out, and I talked about this in, I think, both Full Contact and Prison on Fire, is that Ringo just brings this very specific, chaotic energy to it that's very unique. Reminds me almost of like more of the documentary, hard-hitting style of someone like William Friedkin working in America, or even some of those Italian genre films, crime films of like the 1970s, where it just films like they're not getting permits, they're just going out there and they're shooting. And the way that it just erupts is very naturalistic. There's just a strong sense of danger. We talk about how this film opens, and it sort of opens with like the street brawl that basically starts to escalate the whole situation. And it starts from just some kids, and just a kid loses his temper, rushes another kid. Knives are just picked up by anyone out of nowhere. It feels like everyone is a participant or an onlooker. We see like random people falling downstairs. People are falling over rails. It's a really incredible scene and really helps to set the tone. There's a lot of scenes of just eruptions of violence that I feel like is something that Ringo, if you're contrasting him versus like maybe the other big sort of like more contemporary Hong Kong crime auteur of the time, John Woo, it has a totally different energy to it. And he just has this big chaotic energy that you can feel in even some of his lesser efforts, especially pre-handover. Another thing that really caught me here is Roy Chung just really, really looms large in a way that I would say is more so than even Prison on Fire, where he plays sort of this sadistic prison guard. And I think part of the reason is in Prison on Fire, it's basically, of course, it's an all-male prison. His sort of foil there is Tony Leung Ka-fai and Chow Yun-fat, both of who are pretty tall individuals too. Roy Chung, he's only 5'11", but this is Hong Kong, and people in general are very, very short. And when a lot of our lead protagonists are also female, or males that are just shorter than him, including Lam Ching-ying, who is the cop here, he just feels way more physically intimidating than every other character, and he just feels bigger. So he's just like looming over people, and you just feel his physical presence throughout. And I think this is very early on in Roy Chung's career, but early on even, he still has just like this very intimidating, strong presence. I think it's a great role. He was great in this. He was great in Prison on Fire. He actually is in all three of the On Fire trilogy, definitely early on in his career. I think he's still in his 20s at this point. So I think he helps to really, he's definitely a big catalyst as far as like just raising the stakes here. Another thing that really creates a sense of danger and stakes is students are actually getting killed and dying from the opening scene to the end when we see them just getting chopped up. So it's very disturbing the way that schools integrate with triads in this film. So this is one of those films that just leaves you feeling exhausted and tired in a way. I think this might be my favorite of Ringo Lam's films, but it's definitely not the one I'm going to watch the most. This is maybe once in a decade watch. It is just a very, very hard-hitting. It shows social issues in a way that you may not want to see. It's very, very cynical, very, very, So it's just not necessarily a really pleasant, let's sit down on the couch Friday night and watch in a way that maybe something like Full Contact or some of like those classic Ringo Lam films, maybe even Wild Search, Full Alert. Those films might be just have a little bit lower stakes, and they feel less escalated in that way. School on Fire also, as a film, just feels very humanistic in a way. It does actually have real compassion for its characters, and I feel like the characterizations are really well done for a film that's only running about 102, 103 minutes before the credits, and has a lot of different characters in the ensemble, and we sort of see it through Funny Ewan's character's point of view, who is very good in the film too. But there is a lot of people that are just fully realized characterizations. We see a lot of different aspects to society. We see Scar, who is kind of like the more nice, didn't have a choice but to join the triads. We see her classmates that have joined the triads that are very different and have a very different attitude than Scar. We see the teacher, played by Damien Lau, I believe, who gives a very good portrayal of a teacher. And this is sort of the era coming out a little bit after Class of 1984, where we have like teachers being kind of participants in the often dangerous and murderous students of those times. So very interesting time just globally. I feel like you would not be seeing these films today shown in sort of like the same tonal energy, grounded in more realism, rather than, I don't know, some sort of very fictional setting where teachers and students are facing off. Even something like Battle Royale, which just has a more manga, maybe a little more artificial feel than the way that this one does. This film, I mean, the schoolgirls, anyone can whip out a knife at any moment and try to stab someone. And I love the way the scenes are just sort of cut together. There's a classroom brawl. There's a club fight where just characters are very angry. Women are just as much participants in this in many ways as the men are. And the way that it's shot, it's just that big chaos energy that Ringo Lam brings to a lot of films of this era. Even his wuxia film, Burning Paradise, I'd say really has that sense of chaotic energy to it. It's a lot more sadistic than other wuxia films too. There's like heads lopped off and stuff like that. So I think it's really interesting to see a lot of Ringo Lam's films in this period. And for me, at least, it's making me appreciate them more. I think that may be another reason why I'm liking School on Fire so much, is because this is maybe film 14 or 15, just doing sort of a deep dive through his filmography. Another thing that's kind of interesting, and I think may actually serve this film well, is that there's not an actor in here that just all the focus gets drawn to them in a way that Chow Yun-fat does in City on Fire and Prison on Fire and Full Contact for that matter. Chow Yun-fat is fantastic, and I think he's a fantastic pairing with Ringo, but this film, I think, as a result, has a little bit of different center of gravity than those Chow vehicles. And especially Prison on Fire 2, I think, relied so much on Chow's charisma. This is almost the opposite end of that. And as a result, it feels a lot less centered and predictable in ways. In many ways, too, the plot structure doesn't necessarily build in a way exactly as what we'd expect. So it's always keeping you just a little bit off balance. And then these moments of violence, really, a lot of them aren't necessarily expected. So really well done in that sense too. And so this is one of those films that just leaves you. I watch a lot of movies, and this film just leaves you, if feeling something. It really hits the mark. This is a film that you're going to remember a few days or a week after you've seen it too. Another thing that I think is really interesting about this film, and I think this has changed as time has passed too, is it sort of shows the city changing and values. If you know anything about Hong Kong, you know that the city has changed a whole lot. My ancestors on my mom's side were actually originally from this area a long, long time ago. And so my family has sort of sporadically visited the city throughout the years. I've been a couple times as well. And the city looks dramatically different now than it did then. But Ringo, interestingly, also sort of harkens back past times. We see sort of a grandma here and sort of like the intergenerational aspect of it, where she talks about like family institutions breaking down. Like her granddaughter is faking that her dad is giving money, stuff like that. So we see these family photos. So it kind of hints at like time passing by. And so what's interesting too is the way that Ringo shows the city. It's changed. It's changed since then. We go into these dim sum places. Dim sum places still are, relatively similar. It's a type of dining that's very, very popular in Hong Kong. So yum cha is what they call it in the film. And so we see these tea houses, these very ordinary places. There's a moment where we see like a plane fly very, very close to the apartment building that are on. And it's just interesting because the planes used to come very, very close by the city when they would land in Hong Kong. But since then, the airport has changed over to Lantau Island. So now it's very, very different. And for me, I look at that and I'm like, oh yeah, wow, yeah, this is like that era when the planes were flying like really, really close overhead to where the city actually is. So just really interesting to see like these different places and different institutions and stuff like that. The tea houses and stuff like that are always fun for me to see, especially as someone that's like visited Hong Kong before and just seeing how the city has changed. I recently watched Wild City, which is a Ringo Lam film from 6 years ago, I believe 2015, 7 years ago. And even in that film, which I don't think is a particularly great film, it has a really interesting, it's almost more interesting just as a document to see Ringo Lam's style transposed into the more contemporary Hong Kong. So I think one thing that film does do is that it does show the city quite well, and we see sort of like these dark lights and stuff like that, and it looks totally different from, a Ringo Lam film from back in this time. So for me, it's interesting to see Ringo Lam look back in 1988 to what to the past and to the way values and the city are changing, and then also to look at it from a 2021, 2022 point of view, where the city has changed so much. We have like these high rises. The city has been built up a whole lot. So for me, that's really, really interesting too. This is also hinted at points in like tea ceremony and stuff like that, where, in the past, triads would do it a certain way. And so we sort of see the old school triads, clashing, so to speak, with Roy Chung and sort of like this new school triads, which is, a lot more, cynical and maybe even nihilistic, where like school kids are legitimately integrated into triad organizations and stuff like that. So even the triads are one comment I read, so I shouldn't take credit for this. I forget who said it, but even the triads are a broken institution in the Ringo Lam world. So I think that's really, really interesting too. And yeah, the soundtrack choices are also always really interesting in Ringo Lam's films. I do think I have slightly different taste in music than he does. This film, I think he does fairly okay by me, at least. There's almost like an Irish tune going on, so definitely not someone that's going to be using a lot of canto pop or traditional Hong Kong music in the way that other directors will do. So in that sense, very distinct and non-traditional too. Another thing that I noted too is like this film, the way it concludes is just totally off the wall, crazy, and pretty impactful. I don't want to say awesome because like in many ways it's just as horrific as it is impactful. And it just starts from this Fuji restaurant, and we go and the character, and again, I said at the beginning, we're spoiling it, so I'm spoiling the crap out of this film if you haven't realized already. We see our main character try to stab Roy Chung. She almost does, and basically it ends in like this all-out brawl where the old school triads are just like, nope, we're not participating. We'd normally help the triads in this thing, but Roy Chung is so pisses off so badly that we're not participating. And so it ends up basically in an all-out brawl that concludes with like Scar, our main lead, the teacher played by Damian Lau, and Lam Ching-ing, who plays the cop, who I've yet to mention, all basically trying to kill Roy Chung. Lam Ching-ing in particular goes all out, and it's interesting to see someone like Lam Ching-ing, who is a really, really graceful fighter, if you've seen him in something like Prodigal Son, obviously, or even in Mr. Vampire and stuff like that. So there's a real elegance and grace to Lam Ching-ing, and I love Lam Ching. I think he's great, but in a Ringo Lam film, there's seemingly a pretty strong clash towards that. But it's great to see him in this film doing sort of the Ringo style, where he's going all out, and you really feel him like trying to kill Roy Chung. And eventually they do kill Roy Chung by shooting him multiple times, stabbing him multiple times, and kicking him out the window. But yeah, it's just Lam Ching is just a true joy to watch. And I'm not going to call this film a joy. I don't think it is, but I think it is a masterpiece of kind of that golden era of Hong Kong cinema, especially Hong Kong contemporary cinema. I think you could probably make the case that Hong Kong martial arts cinema had its heyday a little bit earlier than this, but I think this is right in that post Better Tomorrow, and just a film that's totally distinct from those John Woo gunplay thrillers at the time. And so total standout for me. This film is not heroic bloodshed, but it is contemporary triad thriller, I guess. I'm not even sure exactly how you would categorize this film exactly. I just know that it's very unique, and I think it's really great. So yeah, high recommendation from me. Who won the movie? Got to give it to Ringo Lam. I think this film, his vision comes across loud and clear and angry. There are just so many scenes that have that very distinct chaotic energy to him, that's almost a little documentary-like, that I love. And I think for me that's going to be the winner for just about all of Ringo Lam's best films. So yeah, going to give it to Ringo. My rating is a 10 out of 10, so going to give it the perfect score. Yeah. And I do highly recommend people check it out, especially if you have some familiarity with Hong Kong cinema. If I were giving someone advice in terms of getting into Ringo Lam, this would probably not be the first one I recommend. Probably City on Fire, Prison on Fire, and then this. Or you could do those two, and then maybe some of like the later Ringo Lam's films before coming to School on Fire, which I think is the hardest hitting, probably the least rewatchable of kind of those very classic Ringo Lam films, which I would probably say there are maybe 4 or 5 that I would put at that like upper status. For me, this one sits at the top of that. Oh, right. So thank you for tuning in. Let me know how you like this video, and I will see you all next time.